Okay, well, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. David Hamilton to us. Tasmania has so many marvellous scientists that give their time and expertise. And when I asked David would he speak to us, he said, yeah, righto. But he's just on his way back from the Vale of Belvoir, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. Mm. That volume's too high. So he's on his way back to his usual work and thought he could give us 2 hours of his afternoon to do this session on the whole history, basically the eastern quoll in Tasmania. It's highlights and lowlights and areas where it's been able to be released to maintain some of the population. So thanks. Over to you, David.
No worries, thanks.
Can I please remind you, for the sake of the video being worthwhile to listen to later, is that if you want to ask a question, please get the mic to you. I'll have it in the front seat. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that lovely introduction, Reese. So I'm Dr. David Hamilton, so I'm a conservation ecologist with the Tasmanian Land Conservancy, and I'm also an adjunct researcher with the University of Tasmania. So I work between the two organisations, doing all sorts of research on various species through Tasmania too. So as Reese says, I've just been up at the Vale, specifically looking at Tanura brown butterflies, endemic butterfly species that occurs up there as well. So I'm lucky enough to work with a variety of different species and a variety of beautiful landscapes within Tasmania. But I'm going to be talking to you about one of those species in particular today, which I have a particular interest in, and which we've been running a project on for the last few years because we are concerned about their numbers, particularly in some parts of Tassie, and want to start doing something about it and understanding why these kind of things are happening as well. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the Palawa and Pakana peoples of Lutruwita, Tasmania, as the traditional custodians of this wonderful island, and recognise their enduring and ongoing relationship with the lands, waters, flora, fauna of this wonderful island. One of those pieces of fauna specifically being the quoll species that we have here. So I don't know how much everyone knows about quolls in general. I'm sure plenty, but I always like to have an introductory slide just going through the different quoll species that we have in Australia. So there are 6 species of quoll globally. Quolls are dasyurids, so they're marsupial carnivores. And then there are 4 species of quoll that occur in Australia. And we're lucky enough to have 2 of them in Tasmania as well, which is the top 2 there. So the spotted-tailed quoll that is appearing on my shirt here can be distinguished from the eastern quoll by spots going all the way onto the tail. I always like a species that's named with a useful diagnostic feature in its name as well. So spotted-tailed quoll, spots all the way onto the tail. And then the eastern quoll is the one that I'm going to be talking about today, which comes in 2 different colour morphs. There's that beautiful black colour that we can see up on the screen in the top left there. Sorry, I'm terrible at right and left, randomly. And then we also have 2 other species that occur on mainland Australia, the northern quoll that occurs along that northern band of Australia, and then the Chuditch or western quoll, which used to occur across almost 2/3 of the continent, but is now very much restricted to that bottom corner of Western Australia. There's just a couple of real strongholds that species has down in that corner of Australia. So as kind of carnivores in the landscape, these species have suffered a lot in the last 100+ years from persecution and land use change and things like that as well. So there are many populations of quolls that aren't doing terribly well for a variety of reasons. And we're particularly concerned with the eastern quoll here, as I said. So like I said before, there's your nice diagnostic feature. This is a lot of the initial times that I came across quolls was during Tasmanian devil monitoring, actually. I do a lot of devil monitoring across the island. And we set out traps to catch devils, so put some nice rotten meat in the back, and invariably it attracts quolls as well. So we see lots of quolls when we're doing that monitoring work. And then now that I'm working on quolls, finding that it switches around to whichever species you try and catch, you invariably catch the other one. So if you go and try and catch devils, you just catch loads of quolls. If you try and catch quolls, you just catch tons of devils. But this was my initial introduction to quolls, was through devil trapping. And then we would catch both species of quolls in various areas too. And we have that nice diagnostic feature of the spotted-tailed quoll over here with spots going all the way onto the tail. And then eastern quolls have lovely fluffy tails that don't have any spots going onto them. So spotted-tailed quoll, only quoll species with spots going all the way onto the tail. Yes? I'm sorry, I can repeat it as well, so that's fine. The question there was, are the quolls and the devil's friends? They're not enemies, so we'd say they're competitors. So they're in the landscape often looking for the same type of thing in the environment, and this is one of the questions that we're asking around eastern quolls actually, is how their relationship with Tasmanian devils is defining how their numbers are doing in Tasmania as well, because it's a relatively complex interaction that they have with them, because they can have some positive interactions with them, and that devils can come along and like open up a carcass that the quolls can get into themselves, so they'll come along and do some of the hard yards getting into the carcass that the eastern quolls, with their relatively smaller size and less sharp teeth, are not going to be able to get into. But then obviously they're also competing for those food sources as well, so it's a bit of a mixed relationship. So I would say they're, yeah, not necessarily antagonistic most of the time, but yeah, they certainly persist in the landscape fine together, but I wouldn't call them the best of friends necessarily. Yep, another question there? Yeah, so there's two different color morphs of eastern quolls. I think I might actually have that on my next slide. There we go. You're way ahead of me. So eastern quolls come in two different color morphs. So there's that fawn color that's up on the top there, and then there's the dark morph that is jet black with spots going all the way across the body as well. So there's those two different types of color morphs of them, and that is just defined in the same way as eye or hair color or something in humans as well. So a female quoll and a male quoll of light morph could have 6 joeys that were dark morphs as well. So it's defined by their genetics as opposed to being any separation in the species, basically. So they come in those two different morphs. They have a relatively diverse diet. So as I said, we have those native carnivore species here, both the species of quoll and the devils, and the eastern quolls are a bit more specialized in that they have lots of insects as part of their diet as well. They're a bit more omnivorous than some of the other carnivore species that we have here. We find that they'll eat lots of things like berries and things at certain times of year as well. So they have a relatively diverse diet, and they have a very high proportion of insects in their diet as well. So is anyone a animal scat poo aficionado here, out looking for different poos of different species in the landscape? Eastern quoll, that's a good answer. Eastern quolls are a good one to find because they often have lots of insect carapaces and things in their feces. So if you come across a quite dark poo that's loaded with insect carapaces, it's probably for an eastern quoll. And the dasyurids, so the marsupial carnivores that the eastern quolls are part of, contains the devils and the antikynesses as well. And that group is known for being a kind of live fast, die young kind of genus. So they live for a very short number of seasons, and which are relatively intense mating seasons. So I don't know if anyone knows about antykynus here, the little marsupial mice. The males are basically, it's called suicidal mating. So they basically live for one season, they mate themselves to death over one season, and then they just crap out after that, and that's it. And quolls are a slightly less extreme version of that. So they'll have these very full-on mating seasons, but at least the females will definitely make it to the other side. And the males will survive maybe 1 or 2 seasons, and then that's it. So they're relatively short-lived for the size of animal that they are. I think eastern quolls are doing pretty well if they hit 3 or 4 years old in the wild. The thing I always like to compare them to is fairy wrens. So fairy wrens, tiny little nice bright bluebirds, they can live up to 12 years in the wild. And these carnivores that are running around the space much bigger than a fairy wren are doing well if they hit 2 or 3. So it's a bit of a dichotomy between those different sizes there, not necessarily what you'd expect. So relatively short-lived in the environment. So a question you often get asked when you're working on a specific species is just the kind of generic, how are they doing? How are they going? And it's with eastern quolls, it's not a simple answer. It's a relatively complex answer, depending on where you're looking at, what time period, and all sorts of other things as well. So eastern quolls actually used to occur on mainland Australia as well. They were relatively widespread down that southeastern corner. They occurred all the way from the Queensland border right down into South Australia. And they went extinct there in about the 1940s, 1950s, so last century, almost, 80 years ago or something. And they disappeared from the mainland as a result of a combination of different factors. So land use change, there was potentially disease that was going through eastern quoll populations at the time as well. And persecution from humans as well, because they are a carnivore. They'll take out things like chickens and things occasionally, so they're seen as an agricultural pest in some areas too. So there was a bit of persecution going on too, and we lost them from that landscape in the 40s. which means that their stronghold now is very much Tasmania. So we're still lucky enough to have them relatively widespread in Tasmania, apart from, they kind of disappear around Wynyard, actually. You don't see too many eastern quolls past Wynyard in that western coast of Tassie. And even within Tasmania, their situation is relatively complex as well. So this map is based on spotlighting transects that the Tasmanian government has done since the late 80s. So these spotlighting transects are ostensibly aimed at looking at wallabies and possums and things in the landscape and how they're going in different habitats. Do I have a couple of questions here? Yeah. So that they definitely do still occur up here. So I'm saying that this is kind of where they start to kind of thin out a little bit, the populations. I mean, it's interesting to know because they've definitely not been seen too much in this part of the world in the last like 10, 20 years. So I'm talking about here declines in the eastern quoll population as well. And we're in the area up in the blue corner, up in the west, where you can see the quoll numbers are pretty much flatlining along the bottom there as well. So there have never been many here, and they've certainly seem to have dropped off in the since about the turn of the century as well, which is a pattern that we've seen in this too. So I'm just going to go through this slide as well. In that, so yeah, this is based on spotlighting transects that have been done by the government since the late 80s, and they drive 10 kilometres and they record every time they see a quoll on those transects. But that's not the main aim of it. The main aim of it was looking at other things, but they do record every other species they see too. So this is a great widespread data set. Sorry, Reece.
Just you don't have Bruny Island, which is a hotspot.
That's a very good point. This often comes up as well, because Bruny Island is very much a hotspot for eastern quolls, but it's not one of the areas they look at with those transects. So as I said, these transects were never aimed at looking at eastern quolls. It's a fantastic resource for us to use to look at the relative numbers of eastern quolls based on what they're seeing in these transects. And then what we want to do is try and dig deeper into that. It's very unfortunate they do include Bruny Island because that's, as you say, is a great quoll stronghold, so it would give you a good baseline to look at what a healthy quoll population is doing, because they've been doing great over the last 20, 25 years, which is not necessarily the universal picture here. So the little graphs in every corner are representing the relative number of eastern quolls they're seeing per transect. So every single one of those lines is not going upwards. A lot of them are going up until about the turn of the century and then go down. And some of them have recovered relatively well, and a lot of them have either flatlined or just disappeared completely in certain areas. And that's particularly pronounced in some of these areas around the east coast. So that pink one there, they used to be relatively widespread in the Midlands and onto the east coast, and that population has gone down significantly since the turn of the century, which is obviously a point of extreme concern. And this is what the overall trend looks like as well. So if you pull all that data together and then look at what the numbers have been like since just before the year 2000, the number of quolls that they've seen per transect is almost cut in half by the year 2020, which is obviously not great. And I can say that the numbers from the last couple of years, so they're still putting data together from this, but that line has ticked up a little bit in the last few years, which is great. But it's been very geographically uneven in terms of where we've seen those numbers start to recover. So areas like around Cradle Mountain, where I just was, Bruny Island is doing really well, and some areas down in the southeast, just south of Hobart and the Channel and those kind of areas. But then there are other spots where they've gone locally extinct, or they're at very low numbers as well. And this part of the west coast is getting into that kind of bracket as well. So the question is, what can we do about these kind of declines, and how can we try and better understand them as well? So what we talk about with eastern quolls is moving beyond this idea of what we call a live and thorough rescue, which is waiting until a species is very much on its last legs before we move in and try and understand what's actually going on and actually try to actively do something about it. And to do that, we have to understand what the factors underlying these declines actually are, because there's a whole lot of things that could be affecting eastern quoll populations in Tasmania. And we need to understand A, what they are, and B, how they interact, and whether we can do something about that as well. And as part of a project that we have, we're also talking about and have done some translocations to try and supplement some of these declining populations that have fallen into low numbers into what we call a kind of predator pit, which means that the population survives, but it doesn't have any recruitment year upon year. So eastern quolls have a complex relationship with feral cats in Tasmania as well, in Australia generally as well, before they went extinct in the mainland. And they often struggle to reproduce in areas that feral cats are, because the feral cats very much target the juvenile quolls. They're in that kind of size bracket where a feral cat can relatively easily take them out. And they really struggle to reproduce successfully year upon year in dense populations of feral cats. So I'm going to be talking about work that's part of a big collaborative project. We got an ARC linkage grant a few years ago, and this is a collaboration between the Tasmanian Land Conservancy, who I work with, UTAS, WWF Australia, and also the Tasmanian Quoll Conservation Program, who are made up of 4 sanctuaries within Tassie, so Trewanna Wildlife Sanctuary, Devils at Cradle, Bonorong Nature World, and also East Coast Nature World as well. Bonorong Wildlife Sanctuary and East Coast Nature World. So, as I said, there has been some previous translocation work done with eastern quolls in Tassie as well, through TLC, UTAS, and WWF Australia additionally. And one good thing about doing this kind of translocation work in Tasmania is that we can understand what makes a good translocation of eastern quolls as well, because there are lots of efforts going on to reintroduce eastern quolls in different parts of mainland Australia because they've disappeared there as well. Obviously a very big important part of the ecosystem is now lacking. And there have been a few places that have done eastern quoll translocations and releases on mainland Australia too. And they have, some of them have gone very well and some of them have gone not very well at all. So there's been a big jump from doing very low risk translocations on mainland Australia, where they have these big fenced sanctuaries where all the predators and all the threats are completely controlled, and the quolls do fantastically in those kind of environments. And then there was a big jump from that very low risk kind of translocation to extremely high risk ones in areas on the east coast of New South Wales, where they released some quolls in Boordaree National Park, where they'd done some fox and cat control, but the population didn't last very long at all. They all got taken out by some of these feral predators within 6 months or a year, and they didn't do too well in that environment. But what we want to do is understand the intermediary between that low-risk translocation and that high-risk translocation. We can understand that while trying to help these quoll populations in Tasmania as well. So that's some eastern quoll joeys from the same litter as well. So you can see that a litter of quolls can have both of these different color morphs within that same litter. So yeah, like I said, translocation of animals at the best of times is a very risky business, and what we're trying to do is try to understand what makes a good translocation and what we can do to better understand eastern quolls while we're doing that as well. So I'm going to be talking about a translocation that was done around the year 2000 with eastern quolls. So the first population supplementation translocation that we did with this species in Tassie was with a captive bred cohort that was meant to be reintroduced to Boordaree National Park in New South Wales. This was meant to happen in early 2020. I don't know if anyone remembers early 2020, but it was a marginally chaotic time. There were bushfires up on the mainland. There was COVID ripping through Australia as well. Tasmania got relatively cut off. So the quolls weren't able to make it up to the mainland. They were rebuffed by a variety of factors and ended up right back in Tasmania. And that meant that the sanctuaries that had bred them up as well didn't necessarily have a lot of space to keep all these additional animals too. So we're looking for some way to be able to make some use of this quoll population that they had as well. And there was a declining population of eastern quolls at Silver Plains in the Central Highlands of Tasmania. This is a Tasmanian Land Conservancy property just by Interlaken, just on the shores of Lake Sorrel. So we took this as an opportunity. I say we, this is mainly my colleague, Dr. Aruna Hamer, who's just working with data sheets next to the quoll up in the corner there. And instead they were translocated to the Silver Plains property on the banks of Lake Sorrel. So this was a fantastic place to do one of these trial translocations. It's a large property, 6,500 hectares. It's pretty distant from urban centres, so there's not too much risk of things like road collision or any form of persecution. There's relatively low numbers of feral cats in this landscape. We know that eastern quolls can survive alongside feral cats, but not necessarily if they're in any kind of density. There's lots of suitable intact habitat for them there, and the population of quolls has been going off a cliff on that kind of area since the turn of the century and hasn't really recovered. So we wanted to see what kind of impact supplementing this population to try and help it recover would have on a population of eastern quolls in this kind of area. So with that in mind, these 20 eastern quolls were released in December 2020. Sorry, on you go, Reece.
Was there an idea as to what was causing the decline, and has that varied in various places? Are you going to touch on that? Or?
I am going to touch on that. I've got a horribly complex diagram later on that
Excellent.
tries to
Excellent.
unpick what's going on with eastern quolls and how complex the situation is as well. But one of the things about doing these translocations is that it can help us understand what these different factors are and how they feed in, because we know we're going into landscapes where we very much understand what's going on in terms of competitors, in terms of resources, in terms of the landscape that the quolls are going into, and we can look at how that varies and what we have to supplement in it to make sure these quolls do well in that landscape, which helps us understand the threats additionally. So the quolls were released there in December 2020. January is quoll dispersal season, so that's the natural point you would get this influx of new individuals coming into a quoll population anyway, so we were trying to mimic natural processes in terms of the timing there. And they were all fitted with radio transmitters so that they could be tracked, and we could look at how they used the space and how they were performing in that landscape as well. So with any translocation, we have three kind of questions that we want to address primarily. We want to look at how the animals do in terms of survival in that new environment, how they fare in terms of their own fitness as well, whether they're putting on or gaining or losing weight, or whether they're required to be supplementarily fed in that population. We want to look at how eastern quolls in a landscape that you think looks perfect for them, and they all decide they want to be somewhere else and completely disperse from that environment. That's obviously a bad sign for the area that you've chosen, and tells us a lot about the quolls and how they perform in that environment. And we also wanted to look at their genetics, so how they were interfacing with that local quoll population as well, whether they were breeding successfully or whether they were just going and living their lives in that environment but not contributing genetically to the population. And this is a graph just showing quolls gaining and losing weight as they came in. So those two lines in the middle there, the red and the blue one, show males and females. So we see that a lot of the quolls lose weight initially, but then climb back up relatively quickly. So they learn how to hunt, learn how to survive in that landscape really, really fast. This is going from 0 to 40 days post-release there as well. So we have all the individuals in the light lines, and the solid lines are an average across the population. So their fitness levels, the amount of weight that they put on and gained back was fantastic. They did really well, and the survival rates were fantastic as well in that kind of habitat. Yep, you have a question there? Good question. So post-monitoring, yes, sorry. How do you determine weight when they're in the wild? We can't just look at them and figure out how heavy an animal is. It's not usually that easy. So when we do translocations of animals, we do multiple different types of monitoring. So when they have the VHF trackers on, we can look at where they're denning, so we can figure out where they are. And we also make efforts to actively trap them relatively regularly as well, particularly for that kind of 40 to 60 days post-release, because we want to know whether they're gaining or losing weight. And it's so we have traps out in that environment maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks, and then we trap the animals, and then we can weigh them relatively easily, give them a quick health check, look at whether they've got parasites. We can take some samples so we can look at what they've been eating as well, so some fecal samples, and then we can look at what they've been eating in the environment as well, so we can learn lots of things from live trapping them without disturbing them too much too. We can just release them to go about their business after that, and then they do their thing. And we also wanted to look at dispersal, that's a second important question. And we found that the maximum any one of the quolls moved from that site was about 2.5 kilometres, which is within the normal home range of a male eastern quoll. So they didn't move terribly far from the area that they were released. And this compares very favourably to some of the releases that were done in the mainland. So the maximum that any quolls dispersed in that kind of habitat was almost 10 kilometres. So we saw animals moving very far from the point that they were released, whereas here we've seen them moving about a quarter of that, which is very encouraging. It means the habitat is appropriate for them and they're doing well in that environment too. And the last thing we wanted to look at was genetics as well. So these are a couple of about a week old joeys in the pouch of a quoll. So marsupials are fantastic in that we can relatively easily tell whether they've been successful in reproduction because they have a pouch that is open to the environment. So if we're trapping them, we can have a look in their pouch and see how many joeys they have. So we can get some great insight into how they're going in that environment. And we also went back a year post-release to trap the juvenile cohort of eastern quolls that had come into the environment from quolls breeding through that breeding season. Quolls have a very standardized annual breeding season. So they breed in about June, they mate in June, they give birth in early July, and then their young disperse and go about their own business by about December. So they have a relatively predictable annual peak of when the juveniles will be in the population. And we went into that population and did some trapping, so we could get some little tissue samples from the eastern quolls. We take a little nick from the base of their ear, that fleshy part of the base of your ear, and then we can get genetics from that and tell who their parents are based on those genetic samples. And we wanted to see how well that captive bred cohort was represented in the next generation of quolls that came through in Silver Plains a year after that translocation. So this is a family tree of eastern quolls at Silver Plains 1 year post-release. So the parents are in colors along the top, and their offspring are down below with those linking things to them. So males are squares, females are circles, and the parents are representing each one that goes down the line. The key thing to look at here is that the red individuals have wild parents, and the green individuals are captive bred parents. So I don't know if anyone can see much green in that diagram. There is, in fact, none at all. So all the quolls that we caught in the population 1 year post-release had wild parents. There was not a single captive bred representation within that population, which suggests that we released the quolls into that environment. They did very well there, but they didn't breed. So why do we think that happened? This is Neville, who was our longest-lived quoll that released in that environment. I said they didn't live particularly long in the wild. They're doing well if they hit 3 or 4 years, and Neville made it to 5 out there as well. He's one of the quolls that was released as part of that captive bred population. So we have a few theories as to why they didn't have any breeding success. We think it may have been particularly early on. So the mating season was a few months after they were released into that population. We think they may have just been focusing on survival primarily, not too worried about reproducing at that stage. And there was also a slight problem in that the individuals that were released were meant to be released when they were juveniles in New South Wales, but they ended up basically missing a breeding season and then were released into the wild after that. So they hadn't had any experience of of that reproductive season and what it involved as well. So we had some relatively inexperienced animals that were going out there. And they may have been very well outcompeted by the locals for mating opportunities. So they've done well to survive in that environment, but they haven't necessarily bred very well. So there's obviously some good lessons that we can learn from that in terms of future translocations, in terms of the animals that we're releasing, and how we're going about those translocations as well. So very informative in terms of what we learned from that. And we have continued to take further samples from that population too that we still have to analyze at some point down the track to look at the genetics going forward, because there could be some captive bred individuals that didn't breed in the first season but then were able to in the second or third breeding season out there as well, particularly some of those females who might live a bit longer in that environment. So that population has gone up and up. So the population at Silver Plains is recovering quite well. So we can see that little pulse of quolls going into that environment did have a positive effect going on, even if they didn't have any reproductive success. Just the number of animals being boosted in the environment was potentially helpful. And also that high survival rate and low dispersal is very encouraging. The animals weren't running away and they were surviving really well in that wild environment. But obviously we require refinement regarding those individuals that were released and what we can learn from that. So for one thing, juveniles that would naturally be at dispersal age are obviously a good target for introduction into some of these areas, although we are worried that juveniles at dispersal age will be more prone to disperse as well, because that is in their natural drive to get into an area and then get away from their parents, basically. And also the thought of releasing females with pouch young, so they've already effectively bred, and then they will be supplementing that population through their own reproductive output from captivity as well. So that's some of the past translocations that the one past translocation that we've done at Silver Plains. What's going on currently around eastern quolls and around our current project that we're running. So, as I said, we received a ARC linkage grant in 2023. It's running for 5 years to 2028. That's basically addressing some key actions from the conservation advice that's been developed for this species around, firstly, using translocations to increase the population size of some of these declining Tassie populations, and also informing management of that population by looking at how their genetics influence their survival in the wild, and also improving the effectiveness of translocations on mainland Australia from things that we can learn within translocations in Tasmania as well. And for this project, we're specifically focusing on the East Coast and Midlands regions of Tasmania, which is, as I said, where we saw some of those strongest declines. The quolls have really not done well in that population since the turn of the century. Some areas like Freycinet and the fringes of the Midlands that used to have relatively healthy quoll populations have disappeared in the last 20 years. And some of them are at very low levels as well. So they're prime for that kind of understanding of what's going on in terms of those declines, and also trying to reverse and supplement these populations. So this is the hideous diagram that I talked about. So don't try and understand this. This is all the factors that we think are potentially feeding into eastern quoll declines within Tasmania. So it goes through things like competitors and the influences and the reactions they have on each other, to direct predators like feral cats, things like disease, how the habitat's looking, what their prey is looking like, the effects of climate change and land use change in that habitat as well. Effectively, it's complicated, incredibly complicated. And all of these things potentially interact together as well, right? So if you have devils influencing quolls, and then the devils are also being influenced by facial tumor disease, and that's influencing how the cats are behaving in the environment, all these things actually have links between them as well. That is making it even more complicated. So we have a lot of different factors that we have to look at. So we're trying to pick out the different things that we can look at, pick out what we think are the most important ones, and try and understand them as best we can in that environment. So as I said, the East Coast and the Midlands are the areas we're focusing on. So we've been doing monitoring at 12 sites for about 2 years now, where we're looking at all the different things that could be influencing eastern quoll populations. So they are at a mixture of areas where quolls have declined to different degrees and different levels of climate suitability for eastern quolls as well. And they also go from low to high in terms of the expected abundance of eastern quolls that we expect to see those different habitats, from areas that they've completely disappeared from, to areas that they were never found in but we know are climatically suitable for them, up to areas that are very suitable for eastern quolls and have relatively stable populations of them too. But we want to understand why they're doing well compared to other ones that are not doing so well. So yeah, they're just in different regions of Tassie as well. So 3 of those sites are Tasmanian Land Conservancy properties, and then we have some that are part of the Midlands Conservation Partnership right in the heart of the Midlands as well. And then other various types of private land, including the military reserve down at Buckland, which is not good eastern quoll habitat, but is technically good climatically. And at each of those sites, we wanted to characterize basically what that landscape looks like to an eastern quoll. So we wanted to try and understand as many different factors as we could, from the climate, represented by a rain cloud up there, to the habitat and availability of things like dens in that environment, to their potential food sources. So they have relatively wide food source, so they'll eat invertebrates, but they'll also eat small mammals and things as well. So we wanted to understand how they were cycling in those different areas. And also their interaction with both competitors and direct predators, so things like feral cats, Tasmanian devils, spotted-tailed quolls as well. And we did a lot of that monitoring through having up grids of cameras. So each of those sites had a grid of 30 cameras that has been up constantly for the last 2 years, which produces a lot of information. We have a lot of data as a result of this project, but that's helping us understand those larger animals in the environment. So how devils are cycling, how the eastern quolls are doing themselves, so we can pick up eastern quolls by camera monitoring, and things like feral cats and spotted-tailed quolls as well. So a lot of this site characterization has been done by Sophia Jackson and Morgan Ganane, who are pictured on the slide there, student at UTAS, and Morgan's a research assistant at TLC as well. So we've had cameras up at those sites, and at each of those sites we also put down pitfall traps to understand what the invertebrate populations were doing at those different sites. So basically dig a little cup into the ground, see what wanders into it, and then we have a little picture of what the invertebrate population is doing at that site at different times of year. And the camera can help us understand both quoll numbers, numbers of competitors like cats, and also that small mammal population at those sites as well, which is potential prey for the species. And then the pitfall traps helps us understand invertebrate populations. So, as I said, we have a fantastic data set of images from camera traps as part of this project. So we've been working with Barry Brooks' lab at the University of Tasmania, who have developed a recognizer to run through these photos that come out of these cameras and try and identify different animals within it. So we don't have to go through hundreds of thousands of photos and try and identify what's in each of them. And it's very good at lots of species. So you can see that box that's drawn around the devil there. It's identified that as a Tasmanian devil and then pulled out, so we've got data that there's a devil in that environment. What it is not so good at is quolls. So I don't know, can anyone see the quoll in that picture? It is right there. Perfectly camouflaged against the habitat there. And it's difficult for a human to see, and the artificial intelligence can't pick it up either. So it's so well camouflaged in that environment that it's tricking everyone, which obviously makes it difficult for us to run through and not be able to understand the species we're particularly looking at. Yep, you're good. We think there might be one everyone's missed. I don't think that is one. But, so I've got a good sequence here. So this is a dark morph eastern quoll, so it's well blended in. And then in almost the exact same spot, a couple of nights later, we have a light morph that's turned up in the exact same spot. And it's equally well camouflaged and not picked up by the recognizer either. So we've been working with quolls being too well camouflaged for this particular technology, which means we've had a lot of images to go through and try and manually pick out where the quolls are in them. And sometimes it does pick up quolls. So there's a quoll in this image, and I ran that one through one of the recognizers just within PowerPoint, I think, or something, and it has identified there's an animal there, but what it says at the bottom, this is a black and white image of a fish, which I would say close, but it's not even close. So doesn't know quite what a quoll looks like yet. But one good thing about this project is that we're producing lots of data here, and that we have sent lots of this data on quolls to corporations like Google that are starting to develop these recognizers, so they have more images of quolls to work with, which will help us in the future be able to refine this technology as well and help us down the track. Sorry, did you have a question? We are just getting into, we've used Wildlife Insights, which is I think one of the ones that AWC use. We're just starting to get some of the more Tasmanian-specific information into that one as well, because we've run some of our stuff through it and identifies things as species that don't occur in Tasmania. So we've been refining it a little bit and starting to use that now as well. So there's a mixture of different tools that we can use, and they're becoming more adept at quolls as we build more data into that database as well, which is great. So the primary thing that we are interested in from these camera grids is how many eastern quoll detections we're getting in these different areas that we're looking at. So this is the 14 sites that we have across the East Coast and Midlands, and the empty grey circles there are areas where we don't pick up quolls at all. That's a camera that hasn't picked up a quoll. And the darker, bigger circles are areas where we've had lots of quoll detections. So we can see that the quolls aren't turning up at all in some of these areas on the edge of the Midlands and down to the south. We have a real hot spot that's kind of in the Eastern Tiers kind of area, where we have lots of quolls there, and then into some parts of the Northern Midlands too. So we're expecting to pick up quolls at all of these sites, and we only initially picked them up at around half of the sites. So the declines have potentially been even more severe than we thought in some of these areas too, in terms of the numbers of quolls we were seeing. And this is some of the results, just starting to look at how these different things are influencing quolls in the environment. So the key thing in this diagram is that line down the middle. So anything that is to the right-hand side of that line is having a negative impact on the likelihood of finding quolls, and anything on the left-hand side of the line is having a positive impact on quolls. So we can see there's nothing that's having a strong influence in quolls particularly. The top one up there is a kind of landscape-based variable that didn't come out as being very important for the quolls. We find a very strong negative influence on the likelihood of finding eastern quolls, the more spotted-tail quolls we find in the environment. But we suspect that that's probably habitat-based, and we need to kind of combine the two different types of modelling together to figure out what the difference is there. Because spotted-tail quolls tend to prefer denser, wetter environments, whereas eastern quolls like kind of open grassland landscapes that have a nice interface between open vegetation, open tree lines, and some of these more open paddock areas that they can forage in. And there's also a strong influence of presence of feral cats in the environment and likelihood of finding quolls. So the more feral cats we found, the less likely we were to find eastern quolls. And that comes out in this map of cats in the Midlands area, which were much easier to find. So yeah, the quolls are on the right-hand side there, and the cats are on the left. And yeah, there wasn't a single site where we didn't find any feral cats. And see these areas that have nice, big, strong circles for where the cats were? No eastern quolls there at all as well. So the more cats you're finding, the much less likely you are to find quolls in that environment too.
It's a really sad indictment that we've got cats at every bloody spot, isn't it?
It's depressing when you put out camera traps anywhere. One of the species that you're almost guaranteed to find in most places is a feral cat. You'll probably pick up a devil, and you'll probably pick up a feral cat as well. They're the two ubiquitous species that you find in pretty much any area, and the fact that one of them is a feral cat is really sad. Yes? So that
Quality
was
death for cats, you reckon?
Yeah, is there any point in working towards a better life for quolls if we're not controlling the feral cats in that environment too? And that's a very valid point, absolutely. So one of the things we're looking at is looking at what's influencing things here and then how we can try and control these things as well. So in areas that have particularly high numbers of feral cats, then cat control is obviously going to be really important to making sure anything can survive in those environments too. We would find that the likelihood of finding quolls and the likelihood of finding other threatened species that might be negatively impacted by cats like eastern barred bandicoots are very much tied up together. So they're looking for the same kind of things in the environment, and they're both influenced negatively by these species as well. So yeah, cat control is definitely an important part of making sure this landscape is appropriate for some of these species. Yeah, another question? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Please, if you're going to make long comments like that, ask me for the mic.
That's all right. The question was around educating rural communities, particularly around feral cat control, effectively. And if you don't do that hand in hand with understanding how that interfaces with local species, then yeah, it's a losing battle, basically, is what you're saying. Yeah. So my wife works on cat control on Bruny Island, and part of that is a big public education campaign around cat containment if you have cats in your environment as well. And they have had pretty good uptake generally across that community, but there is always a low proportion of people who are quite unwilling to implement any kind of cat containment or cat control, and they're the ones that are causing 95% of the problems as well. It's that last push for that last like 5% of people within the community that is always the toughest one to get to, and I don't think they found a solution for that as yet, as far as I'm aware. It's a really tough one, because cats are a very emotive subject as well. Like, people have pet cats and people love their cats. But we know they're such a dangerous feral predator in this environment. They're so well adapted. They have such a massive impact on the local fauna that it's difficult one to get across to people sometimes as well, which is tough. I have one semi-good feral cat story to tell around this, alongside this horrible map that has feral cats turning up everywhere, in that feral cats don't seem to be quite as impactful in Tassie as they are in some other parts of Australia, because we have devils here. and cats don't seem to like being active at the same time as devils. So we have lots of data from these camera traps looking at the different times of activity of different species. And in areas that have lots of devils, also in areas that have no devils at all, cats like to be active like in the middle of the night. So they're active at dusk and right into the middle of the night. Devils like to be active around then as well. And if we overlay curves from environments that have lots of devils and ones that don't, the cats change their activity a bit in areas that devils are, out into the fringes and out into the daytime a lot of the time as well, which means that they're hunting during the day because they don't want to come into contact with the devils. And that means that they are not coming into contact with some of that native prey quite as much. So the bandicoots, the potoroos, the paddy melons, all those things are going to be active at dusk and at night. And if the cats aren't hunting then quite as much, the biggest impact they have is on things like European rabbit populations. That's their go-to prey source, is European rabbits in areas where other things are struggling. That's the thing they'll go to because they're familiar with that prey as well. And in some of these areas, quite high devil densities, we think the cats have a bit less of an impact, even if they are still present in relatively high numbers. Their impacts on some of the native fauna is much less if there's a healthy population of devils in that environment. And then that obviously has a complicated interacting effect with the fact that we've had devil declines as a result of facial tumor disease too. So as the devil populations go down, these cats start to have more of an impact too. So it's these, another factor in the environment that we have little control over in terms of that disease that's affecting the devils is also having a kind of a release effect on the feral cats, which is not great. But the fact that the devils have that kind of impact on feral cats is a little bit of a good news story for Tasmania at the very least. The impact is slightly lessened, but we still definitely want to see as few cats in the environment as possible, in spite of that. And so Sophia's work was looking at the influence of different other animals, different other species in the environment. And then we had another honours student, William Lyon, who was wanting to look at the physical factors that were influencing eastern quoll occupancy in different areas. So he was looking at different vegetation types, different features of the habitat, that's availability of things like dens. So quolls like to den in old log piles, rock piles, disused wombat burrows and things potentially as well. And he was also looking at the influence of climate and different climate suitabilities and also things like topography. So those real physical features of the physical habitat that could potentially be influencing likelihood of finding eastern quolls or not. And this is similar to the last diagram again, that line in the middle. Anything to the right-hand side of it is having a negative influence on quolls. Anything to the right-hand side is having a positive influence. And Will didn't find terribly much in terms of what was going on in the habitat and how it was influencing quolls. We can see the strongest influences are those of climate. So what we were looking at there was based on a climate mapping for eastern quolls. So that climate map is very effective at predicting where we may or may not find eastern quolls, which is encouraging. And he also found that they don't like rough environments. So rough, rocky, steep environments are less likely to have eastern quolls, and environments that have lots of dense woody cover, so a very dense forest, much less likely to have quolls again. So our next step for this is to put Will's modelling together with the previous modelling, are interacting as well in terms of where we're finding quolls in the environment. So what can we do with this information to try and help eastern quoll populations recover? The big question. So what we've been doing for the last couple of years is using that information on the relative importance of these different threats to conduct repeated translocations across a few different sites in Tasmania, again, particularly around that East Coast Midlands area, and testing some different hypotheses related to the declines of eastern quolls. So when I was talking about that low risk to high risk effective translocations, we're moving from very low risk translocations to not very high risk, but slightly higher risk translocations into areas that potentially have things like higher densities of feral cats, but we are actively controlling feral cats in this environment to try and reduce that kind of pressure. So we understand how quolls will do in that environment if we control certain factors within it. So we did the first translocation of this bigger project in 2025, early 2025. At a property called the Quoin in the Midlands that is run by the Wedgetail Foundation, is doing fantastic work in this big 6,000 hectare property across the Midlands. doing lots of conservation and restoration work in this area. It has an existing but very small eastern quoll population. The habitat is fantastic for eastern quolls. That picture there is a pitch-perfect eastern quoll habitat there. That's nice open areas going into some lightly woody, grassy forest on the edge of it as well, which is exactly what eastern quolls are looking for. And there's relatively low numbers of feral cat detections in that habitat too. So we released 24 eastern quolls there in early 2025, mix of males and females, and this time we had a mixture of juveniles and adults as well. So that was juvenile individuals that were entering their first breeding season, and some adults who were, the second quoll appears there from nowhere. One encouraging another one to leave the box once they're introduced into that environment, which is nice to see. And then again, we wanted to ask these key questions around the survival and fitness of the individuals that were released, whether they dispersed from that site, and how they did reproductively in that environment as well, so how they contributed to that local quoll population in this different environment where we varied the cohort of quolls we're releasing in terms of ages of individuals and their reproductive suitability. It's a nice messy graph, but basically what it's telling us is that, again, the eastern quolls, a lot of them lost weight initially, but then gained it back very quickly. So as they get used to being in that environment, they gain weight back very, very quickly. Anything dropping below that red line there is something that we're concerned about, and everything that dropped below that recovered relatively quickly, which is encouraging to see. And in terms of dispersal, again, most quolls stayed within about 2.5 kilometers of the release location. There was higher dispersal from some of the release locations, so we had locations in more or less all suitable habitat, but more and less suitable habitat, and some moved from one to the other, going from those relatively low quality areas to the higher quality areas, which is what we'd expect to see, which is encouraging. There's always extremes of dispersal though as well, so we had all these quolls tracked again with VHF transmitters, and one quoll was released at this location right in the middle here, and then immediately buggered off about 10 kilometers to the south, dropped his transmitter, and then came back to exactly where he was released, which is classic animal behavior. And then he stayed around there for the rest of the time he was there. He was there for 6 months until we were monitoring the population at the end of the year. He stayed in that same area. He just went for an initial explore and lost our transmitter, so that was very friendly of him. But the majority of animals didn't behave like this one. A lot of them stayed around the area that they were released, which is good quoll habitat, and there's still a healthy population of quolls at the Quoin this year as well, which is great. And this time we also saw reproductive success in those individuals that were released at the Quoin, which is fantastic. So this is a full pouch of young eastern quolls that are about 6 to 8 weeks old. So an eastern quoll can have 6 young at one time. They've got 6 teats in their pouch, so this one's got a full complement of quoll joeys in her pouch there, which is great. So we confirmed pouch young in more than half the females that were released, going up from none the previous time. And then we've been out and taken genetic samples from that released cohort late last year, so we still have to get genetics back on that population, but we're much more encouraged that we're going to see much more representation from that captive bred population within that quoll population this time. So that's watch this space to find out what happens there, but we're very excited about the results. This is a quoll in a devil trap as well. So they do. This was up at Cradle Mountain, so they will sit on the base of their tail when they're a little bit cold because it keeps their bum warm. So it's just sitting there waiting to get out. I think that was a very trap-happy quoll. So this is helping us better understand some of those drivers of eastern quoll declines within Tassie, while hand-in-hand supplementing some of these flagging populations of quolls in Tassie as well. And one of the big bonuses of this is that it's kind of helping us build our knowledge for future mainland reintroductions of this species that's been lost from vast swathes of mainland Australia, and how good translocation is going to work and what they have to do, what kind of environments they have to go into, and how they have to be conducted as well. So there's a lot of people involved in projects like this as well. So Dr. Arena Hamer is the primary person on the grants that we work on as well. Also work with Professor Mena Jones and Morgan Ganane at University of Tas too. And then our honours students that did some of this work. So Sophia, Will, and Erin's our PhD student as well. There's lots of people from the Tasmanian Land Conservancy involved, including volunteers and supporters who help us with fieldwork contributions and actively helping us in the field as well, which is great. And then all the collaborators and Eastern Quoll sanctuaries involved in this as well. And obviously there's lots of landowners involved in this private land conservation that are creating great habitat for Eastern Quolls. So thanks to everyone involved from that side as well. And that's all for my presentation. But yeah, any other questions? Fire away.
What we'll do is we'll get Tion, so we'll ask just a couple of questions now, and then we'll come back and have more questions and conversation. Carol.
So, about 15 years, about 1995, teenagers rented a house, and it was just outside Yola and on a road that ran to nothing. And there were quolls and quolls and quolls. Would they still be there?
In Yola?
Pardon?
In Yola?
Yes.
I imagine that would definitely be one of the areas where we've seen fewer and fewer quolls as the years have gone on. But I don't have any specific information about the Yola population. So
yeah, because of your graphs were down for...
I would say an area like that far, Yola's pretty relatively far west as well, so I imagine that population would be quite depleted at the moment. But yeah, not specifically sure. But yeah, that's definitely the area where they were at low levels and then they've kind of flatlined completely. So yeah, particularly that far western end of the range is where we've started to see some of those really strong declines and disappearances, which is really sad when you see these very high numbers of the animal in the environment. So when they're doing well in the environment, you see lots and lots of quolls, and it's wonderful. And then when that habitat is then lacking that species entirely, it's a point for huge concern. So,
is there any difference in size between the eastern and the spotted quoll?
Yeah, so spotted-tailed quolls are probably about twice as big as eastern quolls.
Oh, yeah.
So you reckon a female eastern quoll weighs about 1 kilogram. A male would be about 1.5 to 2 kilos. And then spotted-tailed quoll females are about 2.5, 3 kilos, and males are more than 3 kilos. So yeah, they're a fair bit bigger.
Yeah, I saw one that had been run over at Upper Castor on Monday, a spotted quoll. So do we report them, or?
It's worth reporting to the government roadkill. I think they've got an app or a website or something as well. Anything that goes on that is very helpful for figuring out some of these hotspots and trying to do something about it. Particularly if there's quolls being...
Take this last question from Mary before the break.
Thank you. You showed 2 marine areas. I was thinking about what I understand was a disastrous relocation into Maria Island of the devils, who decided that little penguins, tasted delicious.
Shearwaters as well, yeah. Yes. We haven't been talking about doing any island introductions of eastern quolls anywhere. It's all mainland Tasmanian reintroductions that we're talking about. And there's any area that we were looking at reintroducing these animals into, we would look at the potential impacts they could have on any other members of the fauna there as well. So if there's anything we think eastern quolls could particularly negatively impact, we would take that into consideration before introducing them there too, which is why we want to get such a good understanding via camera traps by these habitat surveys, so we know what's there, and if there's something that would be in the firing line that is currently being protected from eastern quolls, then we would rethink that question as well, which was something that wasn't done to quite as high a degree in the Maria reintroduction, unfortunately. Yes.
Okay, that's great. We'll have a break now. stupidest little thing. Here. Isn't that a ridiculous bloody button?
There you go.
David, do you want to come in front here?
Yeah, sure.
Just
Yeah.
keep the question there in the front. Lovely. Now, you just spoke about the comments with cat controls thing in terms of opening points. Do you want to say something?
Oh, what's the cat control thing? The cat control strategy? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cat management.
Cat management strategy. Yeah, that's right enough.
Leave the lights on, Joe. Leave the lights on, Jen. Okay. Do you want to make any comments before we go to questions, or?
You know what? Reese was just reminding me that the cat control strategy is up for comment at the moment as well. So if anyone does have anything they want to get out there and say about cat management in Tasmania, then now's the time to go and have a look for that and try and get some comments in on that as well, which is well worth doing if you want to get your 2 cents in. So I'm happy to take questions about anything at this point too. So either quoll related or as I said, I do lots of TLC work with a bunch of other different species and through private land conservation in Tassie too. So anything else anyone wants to bring in is fine too. Yep.
Yeah, Dave, what's the likelihood of a cat virus or some kind of cat-killing disease being let go, but something that cat lovers can immunise their cats against? If they care, they can bloody well fork out and immunise their cats, and the rest of them are gone, and Australia would be a lot better place. Australia would be a lot better place.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I don't know much about biocontrol and virus production and any of that side of things. But yeah, some kind of biocontrol like that would obviously be a good strategy. It works well with the rabbits, with Mixie and things. So yeah, it's You can talk to some biochemists or something about that as well and see what the possibility is. Don't know, talk to the right people, but yes, we shall see.
Are there any captive breeding programs in Tasmania?
Yes, there are. So we work with the captive breeding program in Tasmania is broadly called the Tasmanian Quoll Conservation Program. So they have a captive breeding program for eastern quolls and for spotted-tailed quolls as well. And that's run through those 4 sanctuaries. Again, it's Devil's a Cradle, East Coast Nature World, Bonarong Wildlife Sanctuary down in Brighton, and then Trawana Wildlife Sanctuary too. So they all have captive breeding programs for eastern quolls, and that's all managed as a collective as well. So they're doing genetic management through that whole population of quolls in Tassie too. And that's where our quolls that we get release are coming from as well. So we do lots of work with those guys, and they do fantastic work at breeding those quolls. They've got it down to a fine art. They're fantastic at breeding quolls in captivity and looking after them very well. So they're rearing to go when we have them ready to go out into the wild too. So it's a well-run program.
David, just for everybody else, could you comment on rodent baits again, please?
On rodent baits? Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So we're being asked a little bit about rodent baits during the rodenticides and things like that, and whether we see any influence of them in eastern quolls, and obviously they're right in the firing line for things like that. So something the size of a house mouse or a black rat is perfect prey for an eastern quoll. So any form of rodenticide that's going out is going to be picked up by eastern quolls if they find any of those animals in the environment. So it's something that we make sure we ask about when we're doing quoll releases. So if we know if anyone's using rodenticide, and then encouraging them not to. And then whether anyone's neighbours is thinking about using anything like that too. So it's something we have to keep a close eye on, because, and we test any quolls that we have for effects of things like that too. We take lots of samples, like blood smears and things, that we can look at any impacts of things like that in the quoll population. And I was saying another thing I like to tell people, if you are using things like rodenticides, is that even better than having rodenticides is having eastern quolls in an environment like that, because they're much better at controlling rats than any rodenticide will ever be. If you have an eastern quoll living in and around your shed, you're not going to have any rodents there for very long. That's their preferred prey type is things like that too. So you'd much rather have a quoll in your shed than a black rat or any rat traps.
So can we have a dispersal of young eastern quolls to instead at Bunnings, instead of buying?
Maybe that's the way. Yeah, we need to get the quoll program supplying some to Bunnings as well. So, yeah, you want the rat bait? No, you don't. Try one of these.
One day I was driving along the Ridgely Highway, pretty close to where the APPM airstrip is, or remains of it, and I saw run over a quoll, but he was half a metre long without his tail. He was enormous.
Yeah.
Is that an eastern quoll still? Or just a giant?
That would probably be a spotted-tail quoll. So male spotted-tail quolls can get very big.
He's huge.
So I've caught male spotted-tail quolls that are about 6 kilograms.
Yes.
So
easy.
yeah, without the tail, it would be closing in on being a metre long from top to tail. So they can get really big. Whereas easterns are topping out maybe about half that. Top to tail, they'd be maybe about that kind of size, the size of a ferret or something along those lines. Whereas a big spotted-tail quoll can be as big as a small dog easily, and bigger than the average size feral cat.
Is there any help given, or should one find a design to build dens for these animals? Because I just wondered about, having a den, a safe place for the quoll to mate and have their litter would
definitely
help, assist.
So,
So I only saw your photograph, a little square box. I didn't know whether, not this one, but earlier, and I just wondered, is there any recommended pattern for a den for a quoll?
This is something that we're trying to come up with as we look more into how quolls are using dens in these landscapes. So through our tracking of quolls, we're trying to understand what habitat features specifically they're looking for. We find that they really like rock piles. So piles of rocks piled up that have relatively narrow entrances, which means that a cat or a devil or something bigger can't get in, but the eastern quoll can. So anything that has a relatively narrow entrance that is about the size of an eastern quoll is perfect for them. And anything you can do to put that kind of thing in the environment is going to encourage them too. So I had a landowner that we were doing devil trapping on their land down in the Woodbridge area, just south of Hobart. And he set up a little pile of rocks and stuff out the back of his house that he was wanting to encourage eastern quolls to use, with these quoll-sized holes in it as well. And he called it the Quollity Inn, which I enjoyed very much. And it worked. He had pictures up and he had eastern quolls coming in and denning in it relatively regularly as well. So anything with it, the important thing there is that entrance size. If it's nice. A bit bigger than an egg, probably. But we see them getting into some pretty narrow holes. So we're doing more proper work on this, that we're measuring sizes of different things and seeing what they can and can't get into. And we're hoping to, as a result of that, release some recommendations about what the best things to release in that kind of space are as well. So that's something that we'll do quantitatively and properly and on the horizon. But I wouldn't want to give you an exact size at the moment. I reckon, let's see, small orange, like mandarin size or something. Is kind of perfect. And you can put up a camera and see if something's coming and using it as well. So seeing if it's like popping its head and can't quite do it. Because if it can get in, then it can get out as well. So if it's using it, then it's obviously able to get in. And anything else coming along, see if it's struggling.
And is it cavity on the inside of the wall?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, you want a little living space on the inside that they can take some denning material into. It's good if it's a reasonable size that they could have joeys or something in there, because then it's going to be a good maternal den with that kind of narrow entrance. They have enough space to have. If you think what size 6 small quolls would be, you want to be able to fit that in at the very least, alongside their mother as well. So it has to be a reasonable size.
Me? Where?
Oh, sorry.
Me, I've got the
Yeah, you've got the microphone. You're in control.
Where did the name quoll come from?
Very good question. So I believe that quoll was a mishearing of Gugu Yimithir word from up in northern Queensland, so it was for the northern quoll. And I think the botanist on Captain Cook's boat wrote it down as J-quoll, but the word was actually something more like deagull or something along those lines. So it's a bastardization of an indigenous word for the northern quoll. That's where quoll came from.
Thank you.
But then I think it disappeared from parlance for a long time. So they were referred to as native cats pretty widely until about the 40s or the 50s, I think. And then quoll came back into vogue again and has been used more widely since about that point. And it's much better than, it's good in Scrabble as well. You get 14 points for quoll in Scrabble. It's great,
Are you saying that devils predate on eastern quolls?
Not directly. If a devil came across a vulnerable nest of young eastern quolls, they would definitely have a go at them. If a quoll's chosen a poor den and a devil can get into the entrance, they definitely go for that. But a devil's not going to chase down an eastern quoll and predate on it. So devils, it's difficult to pick out exactly how much devils scavenge versus how much they hunt. And we suspect that 90% of what they do is scavenging, and the rest is maybe chasing down a sick bandicoot or a sick paddington or something. So if you're going to chase something down, you don't want to pick another little predator. That's going to be the toughest thing you could go after. So if you've got some vulnerable small ones, sure, but I don't think they're actively running down eastern quolls very often.
Has anyone tried to domesticate a quoll? They'd make great pets.
I believe there have been multiple attempts to try and domesticate eastern quolls as well. I think they do take, obviously they have these hand-reared animals that take very well, and they use as show animals to show people what a quoll looks like, and they do fantastically. But I also have, I don't know if anyone knows Tonya Cochrane, who runs Inala Nature Tours down on Bruny Island. She has done some raising of eastern quolls through various parts of her life as doing some wildlife rescue on Bruny, and she told me about a litter of eastern quolls that she raised from being very tiny, just for young ones. And then she went away for 2 days, and when she came back, they'd gone completely feral. They didn't recognize her, they were trying to bite her, they were going all over the place, so you have to have constant interaction with them to keep them in that kind of tame state. Otherwise they just, you can't go off on a holiday for a week and come back and expect the quoll to still remember who you are, apparently. It's a bit much of an ask. But it has been an ongoing question of whether they could make good pets. But there's also the thing that goes hand in hand with that about the pet trade, and once you've got something that is valuable as a pet, does that impact the population, because people are trying to take quolls out of the environment to have as pets or to breed up as pets as well, which comes with its own set of problems.
We had a few years ago chooks, but we stopped having them now because we would come down sometimes on a morning and they had been killed and sort of not really gutted, but it was quite distressing, and we would prefer to have quolls than chooks. But I would say they were the spotted quolls. But what we were sort of told was that the parents, when they're bringing up their youngsters, they'll teach them to hunt, and then they'll have like a pantry. And so in the wild, they wouldn't have me going cleaning up all these carcasses. Yeah. They would come back. Is that the kind of behaviour that the quoll would have?
I think that's one of the reasons. So that is probably a spotted-tailed quoll that you've seen doing that as well. So spotted-tailed quolls will often come in and they'll kill a bunch of animals in there, but they won't necessarily eat them all. And that part of that can be a learning experience for the young animals too, that they can take them along and say, this is some food that we've procured, we've gone for a walk, figured out something here, and we can feed over here. So that's definitely something that they would do. I'm not sure about whether eastern quolls do that so much. We don't have any records of that happening in eastern quolls, but it could be part of that learning experience with them too. I have had one experience with a spotted-tailed quoll, again when we were out devil trapping, that we'd often catch female spotted-tailed quolls who are lactating for young in a den somewhere. But then one day we caught one who came in with 2 large pouch young sitting on her back, and we reckoned she'd taken them out foraging to show them where the food was. She was going to the trap. She was a very trap-happy quoll. So we caught her every day, and then the last day she came back with the 2 big joeys on her back, just showing them, there's free lamb here if you want to get some of this. This is a great spot.
Is there any data on eastern quoll populations in Tassie prior to white settlement?
Only anecdotal evidence. So it would be from like newspaper reports and things going back saying that there are lots of quolls jumping around certain areas. But a lot of the historical reports we have of eastern quolls, both in Tassie and on the mainland, are of like vast numbers of eastern quolls where they're in good habitat for them. So if you have these open grassland areas, you can, people talk about going outside and seeing hundreds of quolls hopping around in some of these fields. So they'd be in much greater numbers even than they are at this point.
Okay.
What sort of dentistry do they have, being predators? They must have pretty formidable dentistry.
Yeah. So all the Dasyurids, so the quolls and the devils, have bicuspid sharp molars. So they have very sharp molar teeth that get ground down as the older they get as well. And they've got impressive canines that you can usually see protruding outside the mouth too. So they've got 4 impressive canines, nice sharp incisors, and then these very sharp molar teeth as well. So they can, that's for getting sharp points in wherever it is that you're biting into. But like I said before, they don't have as strong a bite force as something like a devil as well. So if there's an unopened paddy melon carcass or something out, an eastern quoll would struggle to bite into some of the guts and the proper parts of that carcass. But if a devil comes along and opens it up, they've got powerful enough jaws that they can get into it. But eastern quolls wouldn't necessarily be powerful enough. And I've been bitten by all three of them. So I've been bitten by a devil, been bitten by a spotted-tailed quoll, and been bitten by an eastern, once each. Not repeated for each of them. The eastern quoll was fine, it barely broke the skin. The spotted-tailed quoll hurt quite a lot. And the devil, I had to go to hospital and had 4 stitches in my thumb without anaesthetic. Would not recommend repeating that one. So yeah, devil's the one you want to avoid getting bitten by. The eastern quoll wasn't too bad.
I have a question. It's just because the only one I've seen in the wild was dead on the road.
That's often people's experience.
And other people have mentioned it as well. But no one seems to be counting them. So I guess there's a need for everybody to be very careful driving.
No one's counting eastern quolls.
Dead on the road?
Yeah.
Roadkill?
Yeah. No, as I say, it's well worth recording through that government roadkill app website, whatever it is they have now. It's worth seeing what the distribution of different things are. Because one of the things about seeing lots of a specific species as roadkill on a road indicates that the numbers of it in the environment are probably quite high. Like I say this about people who see lots of eastern quolls hit in the Huon Valley or something. There are lots of eastern quolls in the Huon Valley, and people see them relatively regularly as roadkill, but that's because that population is really healthy. It's bad that they're being hit, but the fact that we're seeing more of them hit on the road is telling us that that population is quite healthy. And that is what we're seeing at that point too. We still want people not to hit them on the road, obviously, but yeah, it is giving us some indication of that population health too, as a result of that. So that information is really useful.
Is there anything that you would recommend that ordinary folk do to help protect the eastern quolls?
Yeah, no, a lot of it is about, habitat protection and provision of these denning resources for them. So that they do pretty well on the edge of urban environments and things as well. They'll happily den under a shed or den in the cavity below a house or something. So not kicking them out when they do something like that as well is obviously a good thing. Driving sensibly when you're on the road is a big thing for these guys because they'll get pulled onto the road by other animals being hit, so they're more liable to be hit themselves too. So driving sensibly is a great thing to do. And just, if you've got a bush block or something, leaving things like fallen logs and things around in that habitat, it is creating habitat for quolls and all sorts of other species as well. So keeping that kind of natural and with lots of nice cavities for things to den down in is always a great thing to do.
Are there populations on king and Flinders?
Not of eastern quolls. I don't think there ever were historically on those islands either. I think there may have been spotted-tailed quolls on either king or Flinders. I can't remember. They had fossil records of them on one of them. But yeah, I don't think there were eastern quolls in either of them at any point. It's a strange occlusion from certain areas that we just don't see some of these species making it onto the islands. Bruni is one of the big ones that there's a bunch of species missing there. So there's not devils, there's not platypus, there's not bandicoots on Bruni Island, but there are eastern quolls. Although there's a persistent rumour on Bruni Island that the eastern quolls were introduced in the 1980s at some point. That is not true. There's plenty of historical records, but the locals who don't like eastern quolls say, oh, these things that are shitting on my porch and coming and eating my chickens, they're not meant to be here. But it's not true. They're definitely there historically.
Is there a specific time when the quolls are in their den and having babies and then the babies start to come out? Is there a time of year? Because I have noticed juveniles quolls turning up, I think it was after winter.
Yep.
And they were coming to the chook house. Well, one of them was not fully grown, and it was late afternoon. It wasn't dusk. And it had hold of one of the bantam hens, and I heard all the racket, so I ran down, and it was trying to drag the bantam hen away, and so we ended up this tug of war with the poor old hen in the middle. And the hen kind of survived with some incisive wound in its leg. It did die about 3 days later, but anyway. Yeah, but I'm just thinking it was a very courageous young quoll. Are they pretty cocky little things like that? Didn't want to run away and let go of its hen.
Yeah, no, they are pretty confident. So, a chicken is a big pre-item for an eastern quoll. Like the normal things they're going for are a lot smaller than chickens. So a brave one would definitely go for one. Like you do get it happening occasionally, but the spotted tail quolls are definitely the ones that are more of a problem for chickens. Like they'll actively go after them. That's right in their prey range. Whereas it takes a brave eastern quoll to take on a chicken. And in terms of timing of breeding, so those juveniles would normally be out and about and roaming around like that a bit later in the year, so like in the middle of summer. So from like late November onwards is when they start to become independent. So they have a very set breeding season. They breed once a year. So they breed in it's late May into early June. They give birth at some point in the middle of June. And then they drop the young in the den in around August, mid-August. And then they're in the den for a couple of months and then they become independent. And that follows the same rough cycle every year. So that real pulse of juveniles coming into the population is happening between late November and into January. And that's when they're coming out, they're becoming independent, and also they're dispersing too. So that means that they can be out and running around at funny times of day. They can be ending up on the roads, and they're going pretty long distances, so they begin traveling at weird times of day as well. And that's when they're really at risk of going onto roads and getting themselves into strife at that point too. So that's the real time to watch out is, November through January. And that's the case for devils and spotted tail quolls as well. They have a similar annual cycle, so their juveniles come out in the middle of summer when there's lots of resources available, and that's when they are roaming around and dispersing. So.
One over here with the other quoll wearer.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if bandicoots share habitat with the quolls.
So we've found very, very strong links between where we find eastern barred bandicoots and eastern quolls, and also very strong links between where both of them have declined as well. So they're both very much looking for the same kind of things in the environment. They both like those tussocky grasslands with places to hunker down in between tussocks of grass. That's got some habitat on the edge that's a bit denser, that's got wood piles and things like that as well. And that's very much what they're both looking for in the environment. So we're finding more and more links between what they're both looking for. So one of my supervisors and partners in the project, Mena Jones, has done lots of work on bandicoots in various areas and trying to tie this information together and say, if we're helping one species, we're helping the other one automatically as well. Yeah, an eastern quoll would occasionally take out a young bandicoot or something, but they're not going to be their major predator as well. So they're generally happy enough in the environment together. We can see high numbers of both of them at the same time. So they're definitely not having a negative impact on them, which is good.
I was just wondering about Rocky Cape National Park. Would that be suitable?
It's probably not.
Bandicoots, but
bandicoots, sure, yeah. You'd see southern brown bandicoots in there, possibly not the eastern bars. So I think a lot of Rocky Cape is relatively dense, like coastal scrub habitat through there. Would that be right? So that's not the preference of eastern quolls generally. Any of that kind of dense understory they don't really like. So you'll get spotted tail quolls through that for sure. They really like that kind of habitat. And devils will be happy in it as well. So they can get lots of nice good dens in that dense scrub. But the eastern quolls like it a bit more open, where they can hop around for insects. And so they have somewhere to hunker down where their hunting is relatively open. And they don't really get that as much in coastal scrubs. So there wouldn't be too many of them there historically, I wouldn't have thought, just because of the habitat.
thank you.
Is that us? Looks like it. Okay. Well, thank you again. And they're such a great little creature that we've got here, aren't they? It's so lovely to have them in our environment.
I always say we're lucky to have two species of them as well. So we're one of the only states that has two species of quoll occurring that you can see occurring in the same landscape as well, which is
a lot of people.
Lucky.
Sorry, but a lot of people mentioned that they haven't seen quolls apart from dead on the road. Well, all you need to do is drive around Bruny Island.
North Bruny, yeah.
North Bruny, around Dens Point at night, and you will see anything between 10 and 30 little eastern quolls bounding around the place. Drive very, very slowly, but yeah, they will be there, and you'll see them in a way that you can't see them anywhere else really in Tasmania.
Absolutely. If you cheekily shine a little torch into a paddock or something off the side of the road, if there's an open paddock, they'll just be bouncing with quolls, particularly in again, like December, January, when the juveniles are dispersing.
Yeah, and when there's all the moths around the place.
Exactly, really I have seen them before when if you're driving along on Bruny very slowly and you stop with the headlights on and there's moths and things flying around in the headlights, they just jump around hunting moths in your full beams, and you can just watch them foraging. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely delightful. Sorry, Joe.
Do the people of Bruny Island revere their quolls? Are they seeing it as something special for their island and to protect and monitor and maintain?
Again, I think the vast majority of them do. The vast majority of Bruny Islanders are very delighted to share that space with quolls as well. And then there's that small subset of the population who are claiming that they were introduced to the island and they shouldn't be there, or maybe not so glad to be sharing their doorstep with them. But I think it's generally either a positive or a neutral relationship they have with them. Like they don't do too much damage to people generally. Occasional chicken deaths aside would be the only thing. People generally have
Okay, well, thank you very much, David. Really appreciate your time.
No worries. Thank you very much.